I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and this is the Field Advisor Podcast, where I talk with local experts to unpack the latest agronomy information and research, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions out in the field. Welcome back, everyone, to the Field Advisor Podcast. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and today we have our Illinois soy envoys sharing updates from their part of the state of Illinois. We'll talk field observations, crop conditions, and everything in between. One of our soy envoys sent a text yesterday, and he said, "Everything is everywhere all at once." And I think that sums it up probably right then and there. Looking at the Illinois Crop Progress and Conditions Report from the USDA real quick, just want to give a summary of what that shared. It said Illinois crops showed mixed progress the week ending May 25th. Soybean emergence surged ahead. That's hard to say. Emergence surged ahead at 58%. And that outpaced both last year and the 5-year average, while planting stayed on pace at 75%. Corn planting lagged slightly at 82% compared to the 87% average, but emergence is holding steady at 70%. Winter wheat headed was notably behind at 72%. The average is 87%. And crop conditions were overall generally solid, with 67% of corn and 62% of soybeans rated good to excellence. Now, I know the whole state, that's why we're here, differs from top to bottom, east to west. So real quick, let's go ahead and first start with crop conditions. So tell me what's going on with corn, soybeans, any replants that maybe you're seeing. I know some consensus that I've been reading is that there's slow crop due to cooler temps. So Haley, let's start with you down near Champaign County. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, so Champaign County's been really busy. I'll say we kicked off post herbicide applications 2 weeks ago. So corn's sitting right around that V5, V6, most of it. We have later planted corn that's looking, V2. We're getting ready to start on post herbicide applications. And most of the beans are sitting right around that V3, I would say. 3 trifoliates out. And we do have some later planted beans too that widespread as far as emergence. Luckily, thankfully, we haven't had hardly anything for replant. We've had a couple scenarios with that dust storm that we had a couple weeks ago, but that was minimal. We're talking small acres as far as replant goes. So I feel like we fared very well. This spring has been good for us in Champaign County.
Moving up the state, Byron, you're located in west central Illinois near the Kewanee area.
Yes, I would echo a lot what Haley said. Pretty similar. Champaign County, Henry County, Peoria County, very similar conditions. Seemed like the crop was stuck in neutral for quite a while. It looked like corn was at V3 forever, every day. We're like, are we even growing, right? But we finally able to get some good conditions, good sunlight, good temperatures, and finally got about 1.5 inches of rain yesterday. A lot of the post-emergence in corn is done, complete, with the exception of some of the smaller corn at that V2, V3 is getting sprayed now. Soybeans will be right behind that. I'm imagining after this rainfall, after we get dried out a little bit, we'll start spraying beans fairly quickly. But overall, really, really good progress with the crop. Very few issues in our area of the state.
And then heading north to you, Torey.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Byron said. Very much just, it was like the crop was stuck in neutral there for 10 days to 2 weeks almost. With the cooler conditions, but then once the heat kicked in, things started to really pick up and grow much faster. Corn in my area, the for early planted stuff is in that V5 range. Some of the later planted stuff is in that V1, V2 range still. A lot of the earlier corn has been post sprayed. And we're starting to see more and more side drifts go out now. So I would imagine that when fields dry out again here, we got about 0.9 of an inch of rain last night and into this morning. So I would imagine that once fields dry out again, we're probably going to see post-spray start on some of our beans. Most of our beans right now are in that V1, V2 range. there's still a few fields that were later planted that are still in that emergence phase. So all in all, looking pretty good, especially now that we've got some decent temperatures back.
Yeah, I just looked at the weather outlook, and here in Knox County, it's sticking with the mid 70s. I think right now it's 62 degrees, and they said it was going to get up to 70 today. I said, I don't know where you're going to get that from, but it seems like cloud cover, the rain, it's just kind of just sticking around. So hopefully the sun will appear here soon. Not forgetting either about Southern Illinois. I'll read Mike Wilson, who's also our Illinois soy envoy. He said 90% planted, side dress started good on the early corn, and he says we'll have some tassel by the 4th of July. He says we'll have some tasseling when the first planted dents. So that's an interesting tidbit. He said posting first planted beans, wheat will cut in 15 days. And then, like I said earlier, he said everything, everywhere, all at once. So you got a lot of fields in different stages. But speaking of the fields, you talked about post-herbicide applications. Torey, I'm kind of curious on the cover crop side. Has things terminated well? Did you see any problems? What's the direction now going with cover crops?
Yeah, by and large, I think spring terminations went about as well as most of the farmers could have hoped. The only real issues we ran into was where people tried to terminate a little bit too early. Maybe that rye hadn't quite broken dormancy. Sometimes we get a little bit carried away with our tank mixes, and we run into some issues with not getting good control in that respect. But by and large, I think termination went quite well, and I think most of the farmers in my area terminated a little bit more on the early side, just for the sake of trying to preserve some soil moisture. We were kind of behind coming into the spring, so we didn't want to let the rye get too much growth ahead of us. So, and the beans in those fields look pretty good so far. They're right on pace with the conventional beans too. So, I'm pretty happy with how cover crops performed this spring, and I think most of the farmers, at least in my area, are pretty happy with what they've got. We got just enough biomass in most of these fields that I think we're fortunate, and we're getting some extra weed control out of a lot of it this year.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Saw the weed control, weed suppression well in those cover crop fields.
Yep. The cereal rye can do a really good job of holding back, especially some of those early season flushes before it starts to decompose and sort of deteriorate later in the season. But it's doing a very good job of holding back, especially the water hemp right now. So I was just starting to find good flushes of water hemp in some fields kind of late last week. But in the cover crop fields where I know that water hemp lives, it's really holding it back pretty well.
Speaking of weeds, Byron, I know one thing that you're in the adjuvant business or very familiar with that. What are you seeing with tank mixes, and what post herbicide conversations are you having with farmers right now?
Yeah, I think as we got into post corn season here, and even in the preseason, we did have some compatibility issues early on with some older product. Not sure if you saw that over to your side of the state, Haley, there, but there was some older product in inventory that was being used that had to get flushed out of the system or sent back. And those issues were corrected fairly quickly. So the pre-emergence herbicides are definitely working like they're supposed to. There's a lot of new soil applied adjuvant systems out there to go along with our pre-emergence herbicides, and they're doing exactly what they need to do. Luckily, they give us a little more time to get a little more rainfall in that window. So I think they're doing their job just fine. Post-wise, no adjuvant issues. I would just ask, just to reiterate, to read those labels and really dig into them, because the chemical you're applying and that label is the language. It's there for a reason. We don't want to have any mess ups. We want to add those, condition your water, right? But then when we get to the end is when you can add those tank mix adjuvants in there. But really be careful and use a jar method if you need to. If you've got 6 or 7 or 8 things going at the same time, make sure we don't have any compatibility issues and we're not clogging nozzles and hoses and things, and we just waste a lot of time doing that. So make sure it's all nice and clean, comes out really fresh there. But especially as we move into soybean season, we get a lot more tank mix combinations going on in soybeans that can be very complicated sometimes, multiple active ingredients in the same tank. But just really watch out for that. And then after you look at the herbicide label, check with your adjuvant manufacturer as well, because there's certain things that they've done research-wise that work with those labels really well. So make sure you're looking at those labels really well, and ask the questions, ask those common questions that come up.
Kayla, you have anything to add on that, being in the ag retail side?
Yeah, I think hitting on what Byron said as far as just tank mix compatibility. I know, luckily, knock on wood, I didn't run into any issues, thankfully, this year, but I know we've had issues with just some of those pre-emerge mixing in, your borons, you get in there, the ammoniated zinc, and then the ATS can always be a struggle too. So it's just watching, obviously, mix order, making sure you're putting in compatibility agents and hitting on what Byron said as far as the right adjuvants. Another part of that, looking at post time frame, is what I'm starting to notice in Champaign County is some of this water hemp on this early corn is getting some height to it. So looking at what those label requirements are as far as what size that water hemp is, making sure it pairs up if you're running certain product. We've been making sure that we're maximizing that Callisto out there as far as what we can apply per acre. And we've even been in a scenario where we're spiking in extra Callisto, just trying to maximize it, where we can steer clear of using like a dicamba product, because you know how dicamba is, especially just the volatility side, trying to do the best we can out there for the acre, but also trying to get max control too. I felt like we were seeing water hemp this year on the earlier side than what we've seen in the past. And I don't know if that's just because, there in April, we had a warm spell. We were seeing it. I had guys that were getting ready to go plant corn, and it was beginning of May, and I found water hemp out there in fields. So I think that just shows kind of the adaptability of that plant in general, and just the struggle that we are going to have to continue making sure that we're maximizing those pre's out there, and then following it through into that post herbicide program too.
Is water hemp the only weed issue or concern that you're seeing right now? Or I know I was in a field, I think last week, and there was more than water hemp out there. So what other weeds should they be on the lookout for that you're seeing in fields that are problems? And I'll let anyone respond to that.
I think so. What I've noticed this year, and I don't know if it's just the pre-emerge, I think that's where it's coming from. Large seeded broadleaves, we're seeing a break, and I've seen a ton of giant ragweed, which I haven't had to deal with that it's been a long time. I haven't heard growers dealing with that in a while around here. And then also I've seen a lot of cockerel this year. So more so where the waters ran through those fields. So I think that's something looking into next year, making sure that our pre-emerge products have that large seeded control in there, trying to figure out, a better mix combination. I don't know what you guys are seeing.
Yeah, same way. Giant ragweed is starting to really come on pretty strong as well. And keep in mind the difference between small seeded broadleaves and large seeded broadleaves is where they're at in the soil profile, right? So different tillage practices, and we've got farms that turn over, leasing wise and rent and whatnot, different practices potentially. So we've got to really get a heads up on what practices we're doing, because we are bringing some of those larger seeded broadleaves up in the soil profile to get emergence. And then water hemp is one we just discussed that can emerge from late April all the way through double crop soybeans, right? And itty bitty things that you can see them 3 foot tall at the same time in the same field. Sometimes it's one of those weeds. But those are the two main ones that I've seen this year.
Yep, I would agree with that. I'm seeing more ragweed this year, and this year in particular, for whatever reason, where I've been seeing a little bit of an uptick in the amount of lamb's quarters pressure as well. Usually relatively easy for us to control it, but it's another one of those that can grow pretty fast. So yeah, I have seen more of that, but the water hemp is sort of our main focus every year.
Get out one of those weed ID books and start comparing. I know Stephanie likes to quiz me on weeds, and I say they all look the same. I know they're not all the same. Don't come at me for saying they all look the same, but I'm like, I know they're a weed and I know they shouldn't be there, but it depends on the species. So really get out in the fields and look. So speaking of weeds, you talked about the temperature. We had that warm spell in April. We just had kind of another warm spell. It seems like the weather's going from cool, cloudy, and then we'll get a few sunny days, and then we'll go back to cool and cloudy. I can't remember who said it. Someone said the crop felt like it was stuck in neutral, and I think that was it. Are you seeing finally those plants start pressing on the gas pedal a little bit, or what are we seeing in terms of crop growth in the fields that you're scouting?
Yeah, I think you can almost absolutely see the corn growing now with the temperatures we just went through. I saw some stuff on social media with the paint, right? We have the orange paint, and you can just look at that 24 hours later and go, wow, that corn really grew. So we're definitely seeing the corn get off to a really, really good start now, finally. Soybeans are actually starting to, depending on what conservation system you're in or full tillage, they're starting to come nicely as well. Just got through Peoria County again, and then down to Bloomington and back up in the last couple of days, and you can really see the soybeans start to really grow as well. So it's good to see finally some of these temperatures. I'd like to get to average at least. It'd be nice to have average, but it seems we don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I noticed just yesterday in the drive that I took that I was starting to see some rapid growth syndrome show up in some of the whorls on some of the first planted corn. We're starting to see that yellow flash, not an uncommon occurrence when that corn really starts to grow. It kind of shocks the system, especially if we've been cool and then we got warm. We see that yellow flash, and now we're kind of trending back to a little bit cool, but definitely saw that yellow flash at 60 miles an hour from the highway.
Oh, yeah.
So we talked about weeds. Last week we had a field advisor webinar, Kelly Estes and Dr. Ahmad Fakori. Kelly's from University of Illinois, Ahmad's from Southern Illinois, and they talked about insects and disease. Not seeing too much right now, but some of these diseases thrive on wet, and we're certainly wet throughout parts of the states. So any observations when it came to insects or disease or anything to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, ironic you bring that up. Yesterday I was at a golf match in Bloomington with my son, and I got to walk with a farmer from, I believe it was the Newton area, and his son was playing as well. And we were chatting. He had about 350 acres of replant of soybeans, and they try to tell him not to treat. The grain elevator was saying, don't treat your soybeans. It's too late, whatever. And he said, no, I think we're going to treat those. And so he treated 350 acres of replant soybeans on the fungicide side, and a wise move. He's seen fungicide pay off every year, regardless. So it's almost a no-brainer practice for him to do. But I think that comes to top of conversation as we get later with either it's late planted beans or even replanted beans. I really think the fungicide is an exceptional return on investment for that purpose there. Insecticide side, kind of all over the board, more of a scouting thing and really looking at it, what's going on at that time. But that's just my thoughts on if you did a full load treatment, for example. But fungicide for sure.
Any other observations out in the field?
I personally haven't seen much for insect feeding out there. And I think one thing to keep in mind is kind of like was hitting on was the fact of fungicide. I mean, we're starting to plan for fungicide passes as we're getting closer to this end of June timeframe, making sure we have those acres lined up. So make sure you're out there scouting. I think that's the big thing as we're moving forward, and obviously being preventive on the preventative side, trying to get there earlier than already seeing the disease show up.
Haley, are you seeing any growers pull back on their fungicide plans because some of these market prices still aren't moving in the direction that they want to be?
Yeah, you hit on it. Back prepay time frame. So in that January, December, most of my guys that I'm working with almost always prepay for fungicide, which has been really nice because once you can get them committed to that, they've seen the value in it. Usually they follow through, but I will tell you, even back then when we were having those discussions, I had a couple guys pull back, maybe not doing every single acre. They're splitting half the acres across their farm this year, and then we're going to choose, closer to time frame where exactly we're going to apply those. I think there's still continued conversations on the fungicide. I think there's still acres out there that are going to need it. But maybe the insecticide talk is something that, depending on what this weather pattern turns into. Last year we dealt with aphids. That was an outbreak right here in Champaign County, and I know other counties were dealing with it pretty heavy. So who knows what the season's going to turn into and what we might have to battle, but I think it's just a continued conversation with guys.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I've always operated from the standpoint of you want to have some fungicide prepaid, and then we can decide where it goes. I always called it the game time decision. There's no substitute for scouting. Either whether you scout yourself or you hire it done. There's no substitute for a good crop scout. That's the world that I came from. There's just no substitute for having good field scouting to make an informed decision when the time is right.
Mm-hmm. Yep, get out there and don't do a windshield survey. I've learned to actually get out of the truck and go look. So I'll turn it over to you guys. What other questions are you getting from farmers that you'd like to share with our audience that you think would be a good piece of information for them to hear?
I was sort of taken back by the weather webinar we had with Chicago meteorologists, and it brought up a couple things, and it really seemed that the weather talk this year, how windy it's been. I mean, tremendous. It feels like we're not in Illinois, we're in Nebraska or something. That's been a huge topic. Are we in a drought? Are we on a 3-6 month or year-long drought type thing going on, where you can go back generations and they can kind of record those specific timeframes where they remember where they had a 3-year period or 5-year period of just prolonged dry weather and the crop wasn't as good, and then it would come out of that. But there's been a lot of weather talk this year, more than normal, I think. And I always pointed back to that webinar because I thought it was exceptional, and I hope everybody can get on that.
Yeah.
I know fieldadvisor.org has that available, I believe. So just a great way to see kind of what's going on now, why we're all of a sudden Tornado Alley versus 20 years ago, that type of thing. So a lot of interesting conversations around the weather for sure. And then commodity prices are, of course, I'd say that the other one that's the big talk right now, right? Because it's just
right.
They're not where they need to be. What's going on with regulatory and everything else. So definitely some hot topics out there as the crop is actually growing.
And it's only first week of June.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about some of these derechos, they've been coming in end of June or into July. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we're just getting started with this growing season. Reports of tornadoes recently and that dust storm went through Chicago. So I think a lot of consumers are now taking notice even more. And looking at the drought monitor, I have 2 comparisons that I'm looking at. It's getting slightly better, but there's still a good half portion of Illinois to the north, Torey, where you're located, parts of Byron where you're at. Haley maybe even touches you. It's still in a D1 drought. I mean, even though we talk about Southern Illinois being wet more than normal, there's still farmers that haven't even planted anything. And we're looking, like I said, the first week of June. So I guess it's really a tale of 2 stories, and we still have quite a bit of growing season to go. Yeah, any other observations? Go ahead, Torey.
I would just say I got to give a hat tip to the farmers in Southern Illinois because they've really been dealt a tough hand this year, and for them to get as much crop planted as they have in the last few weeks, that's nothing short of miraculous in my opinion. They've done a tremendous job getting that crop planted down there, so just they deserve the mention.
Definitely. Okay, so my last question for you all is what should be on farmers' radars? I know we talked about fungicide, so if you wanted to expand on that, but what should be on their radar that you don't think is, or what should they be doing out in the fields? I know we said crop scouting. Is there anything else that should be top of mind?
Yeah, when I think about that question, it's always interesting because since we're in the commodity environment we are, the pricing environment we are in, return on investment is a big deal. Cost of production, really diving into the details of some great programs that are out there. All of the data is there. I look at all the basic manufacturers that have their data that have it backed up. I call it the piano graphs. Everybody's seen the piano graphs, right? And when you have a really good piano graph, meaning that things are good and the ROI continues to come up with a lot of different trials and replications, those are the products that I really hone in on for those growers, because we're making those fungicide decisions soon, right, Haley? It's significant, and I've never seen a better cover crop kill this year and than I have this year. Weed control wise, how it killed, everything. It looked really good out of the last 6 or 8 years. It seems like that return on investment is going to be a really good one this year. So just on the radar, just to continue learning and really developing that pool of educated resources. Just keep an eye on that, and the ROI will be there using those products.
Haley?
Yeah, and I think piggybacking off of that is, like we've discussed, it is only the first week of June here. And a lot of guys are just getting started on post herbicide as far as their bean crop goes, or even on the corn side. Make sure you're out there scouting, taking things in. I know this past week we just found scouting a bean field, it's starting to show up yellow beans are. What exactly that is, doing some ground truthing, we came up with manganese deficiency already showing up across fields. So we're going to be running a micronutrient pack with their post herbicide to try to help alleviate some of that's already showing. So just know that obviously we have a plan in place, but we can always tweak that plan in season, especially based off of what you're seeing scouting.
Yeah, and I would just say that it's, as the cover crop and soil health agronomist here, it's never too early to start thinking about what your cover crop plans are for the fall. It's a systems approach, so make those decisions. Get your seed orders in as soon as you can. It's a lot to handle throughout the growing season, but it's never too early to start thinking about plans for fall. So always be thinking about what your next step's going to be.
Torey, real quick, touch on a blog you just wrote about herbicide carryover and how that might affect the fall cover crop. And it's on Field Advisor for you to go read, but could you just give us a quick summary of what you wrote about there?
Sure. Yeah, herbicide carryover is something that a lot of times we kind of just think about that in terms of, something showing up in my corn or my soybeans, but, left over from last year. And a lot of times we do run into that when we've had a pretty dry year and we haven't had the moisture to help alleviate some of those issues for the corn or the beans. But a lot of times we don't necessarily think about what our in-season herbicide programs, what effect they might have on establishment of a cover crop in the fall. So the blog is basically just a synopsis or a summary of things to keep in mind to ensure that you have your best chance to get your cover crop established without having herbicide carryover issues. So we kind of touched on the idea of the late spring planting in southern Illinois. That's going to push back some of those post-emergent herbicide applications in that part of the state. And that means that the window of breakdown for those products is shortened before harvest and before cover crop seeding. So the same thing can be true in the northern part of the state where we're still fairly dry. So the risk is always there, and it's just important to be cognizant of that, know what products you're using, and know what products are going to present a risk to cover crop establishment in the fall. The silver lining in all of it is that, by and large, most of the cover crop usage in the state is that cereal rye after corn and before soybeans, and cereal rye tends to be one of the most tolerant cover crops to herbicide products. So not that it's totally immune to those types of things, but it is one that's very resilient to having herbicide carryover issues. So frequently a lot of the brassicas and some of our clover species tend to be a little bit more susceptible, particularly like with an ALS chemistry when it's used. So just be aware of those things. It never hurts to do a bioassay. Go out and get you a 5-gallon bucket full of soil and plant some cover crop seed in it ahead of time and see how it does. Not a bad idea. But just be aware of what your system is. If you've got any questions, reach out to somebody who you trust with some knowledge of the topic.
Yeah, reach out to Torey.
Reach out to me.
He's a great resource. All right. Anything else that we didn't cover on this episode of the Field Advisor podcast? I feel like we're just kind of in this period where we're still waiting for some to get done with planting across the state. But now, like you said, we're moving into that post stage, and then soon we'll be going to fungicide. So we'll definitely keep up to date with Torey, Byron, and Haley as the growing season continues. So thank you all for sharing your updates with us today, and we'll talk to you more next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor podcast on your favorite podcast platform.